Oh, what is up, YouTube? My name is G3 Iron, and today we are taking a look at pricing rares in Path of Exile. So this is a question that we have frequently gotten. It's a question that I've asked myself, as well as several other guildmates and Patreon supporters and Discord users have all asked. It's something that, as a new player in Path of Exile, it's one of the more overwhelming things to do, is to interact with the vast amount of loot that can drop in Path of Exile, and learning how to price that loot accordingly, according to its value in the present league that you are in, is a difficult skill to learn, but it's one that you can learn. So we're going to take a look at some ways in which you can get familiar with relative values on yellow items. We're going to give you some basic principles to latch onto that hopefully will be able to stand the test of time regardless of whatever league it is that you are finding this video and hopefully using it to your benefit. So all that being said, why are rares so good in Path of Exile? Maybe you're coming over to Path of Exile from other action RPGs, maybe you've never played an action RPG, or maybe you're coming back to Path of Exile after a break for a while. Why is it that rares specifically are so good, or yellows are so good specifically in Path of Exile as opposed to unique items? Well, there's a couple of reasons why. One is that they've got top-end rolls. So most of the top-end rolls that are available for stats on items in Path of Exile are available on rares and not necessarily available on uniques. Some uniques, of course, break that rule, where some uniques have got rolls specifically that aren't achievable on rares, but you get the general picture. The general picture is that if you want top-end rolls on your gear, you're going to be using rares and not uniques. Secondly, it's that rares provide those roles in flexible gear slots. So oftentimes as you are building your build, if you're following a build guide through the forums, or if you're making your own build guide, you will need to fill specific item slots with uniques that make your build go, that provide you with the mechanics that make your build go. And so what rares do is rares fill in the rest of those needed stats that you need on your build that aren't necessarily provided by your uniques, but that are key to making sure that your build can tackle whatever content and whatever goals it is that you've got in front of you in Path of Exile. Then thirdly, rares are really great because there's some potential for some really niche stat combinations that would otherwise be unavailable on uniques or on simply white or magic items. So rares are very valuable because of these three reasons in general. Now, the anatomy of a rare breaks down into several different parts. So first off, there's the base type of the item. Now, a base type of an item can change based on its item requirements. So you can read those requirements basically as preferences. So depending on the item's base type, it will have certain preferences towards certain coloring of sockets, towards certain defensive types, as well as even some specific stats. So if it's a strength-based piece of gear, it will be defensively oriented towards armor, and it will favor red sockets when you're using chromatics to roll it. If it is an intelligence-based item on the base, then it will be an energy shield-based defense item, and it will favor blue sockets as you're rolling with chromatics. If it is a dex-required gear, then it will be evasion based with green sockets. Now, of course, there are hybrids between all of these where there are a mix of strength plus int, or strength plus dex, or int plus dex, but you get the picture. The picture being that base types are going to have preferences for what sorts of rolls and what sorts of favorable outcomes are preferred, not necessarily achievable, but are preferred on a particular item. Of course, almost any combination is possible in theory, but the amount of currency that it's going to take to try and roll or craft an item to hit certain things is going to vary based on its preferences of the base type. Now, items, of course, have implicits. Rare items can have implicits. Some rare items can have very valuable implicits and useful implicits for builds. So, for instance, if you're playing a melee build and you're in a glove slot, if you're looking at gloves that are rare gloves, they may have the implicit that gives you increased melee damage or increased physical damage. that can be, both of those stats can be incredibly helpful for you on a rare pair of gloves as an implicit that you might not want to roll over via a corruption implicit or via looking for other gloves that may not give you those implicits. That's something that rares actually can do that a lot of folks don't necessarily consider, that the base type of an item and its attached implicit or its natural implicit can oftentimes be a factor in the value of the rare item. Rare items also have prefixes and suffixes. Now, what is a prefix and a suffix? Well, simply think of it this way. They are two different categories into which all of the different roles that the item can naturally have are lumped into. So you either have things that are prefixes or suffixes. You don't necessarily have something that fits into both categories. So when you're rolling a stat onto an item, or you identify an item and you're looking at the item, it's going to have several different prefixes and suffixes. Oftentimes you'll hear people talking in videos or on a stream about how an item has got an open prefix or an open suffix. This means that the item has not filled up its maximum allowable prefixes or suffixes, and therefore you can use that open slot for crafting purposes. Next up, corruptions replace implicits. So remember how we just a moment ago chatted about how sometimes implicits can be very, very important for specific builds and specific gear? Well, if you do choose to corrupt your item, that corruption will replace whatever implicit is there. So that's just a factor to keep in mind as it is that you are pricing out rares, that sometimes there are rares that can be very, very valuable with specific corruptions on them because the corruptions are very, very valuable in combination with the other stats that are on their rare. But all that being said, corruptions are another factor just to be aware of on rares and on their value. A couple of quid pro quos. So this is me doing you a favor to help you do me a favor. All right. Here's two disclaimers as we get into the nitty gritty of pricing yellows. First off, the don't blame me disclaimer. So these are general rules for if you should price check something. Okay. General rules. Prices can fluctuate wildly throughout even the course of a given day, let alone throughout the course of months of a league or even months of multiple different leagues and over the course of an expansion. So something that was like an OP, good game, top end piece of gear in Path of Exile 1.0 may only be worth a chaos or two in the present currency iteration or currency iteration of Path of Exile. It simply may not be very valuable anymore. So these are general principles to help you out. I'm going to try to avoid giving too many specific prices on things because I just don't want you to think, oh, well, Iron said this one particular thing was worth this much, and when I price checked it, it's not worth that much. Just realize the don't blame me. Just remember the don't blame me disclaimer. All of this is relative to the current league that you're in. Disclaimer number 2. Okay, which that's funny because it says number 2. Anyway, I'm not going to go down that trail. The phrase worth something, I'm going to use that here throughout the video. The phrase worth something can have a wide range of meaning, okay? So for a lot of you players, if I mention something as being valued at 2 chaos, that for some of you might mean absolutely nothing. 2 chaos to some of you might be not even worth your time to interact with, trade with, or look at. For others of you, 2 chaos may be the first 2 chaos that you've ever earned in Path of Exile, which is awesome. So saying that something is worth something in our present context for this video means that it's worth your time to price check. That's what it means. It means slow down and price check it. It doesn't mean that it's going to be, some OPGG mirror tier, highest possible prices, top end rolls on the item. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be garbage or trash. It just means it's worth your time to at least price check it and see if it's then worth selling. So there are several tools that you can use to price check items, and we're going to actually chat about some of those tools today here in the video. Okay, enough of the basics. How do I price this thing? So let's say you've got something pulled up right now in Path of Exile and you're wondering what the value of it is. Well, regardless of whether you're playing hardcore or softcore, here are 4 basic guidelines or 4 basic recipes. I don't want to call them recipes because you don't trade them in. It's not a recipe, but they're 4 basic things to keep an eye out for 4 basic combinations of stats. So the first one is life plus 2 resistances is worth something, that it's worth checking out. And the reason for this is that the value of the item is going to widely vary based on the roles of the particular item. So if you identify a rare that has got life and let's say lightning and fire resistance on it, let's say they're very, very basic resistances. So let's say it's 10 lightning and 10 fire along with maybe 15 life. Those aren't great rolls. That might be something that's useful in Act 1, maybe Act 2, but somebody in the end game is going to be looking for something with much higher rolls. So something later on in the game, let's say that's got 80 maximum life, along with, let's say, 30 lightning resist, and let's say 20 fire resist, that might be worth something to someone on the market. So the value is going to depend on the roll, but that combination of life plus 2 resistances is generally worth something. And the closer you are to the start of the league, of course, the more valuable that is going to be. General rule number 2. Crit multi and crit chance is generally worth something. So crit builds are quite often pretty expensive to put together simply because it's tough to min-max all of the different slots in every single piece of gear for all of the different modifying rolls that need both crit multi and crit chance. So some leagues, when cast on crit or other crit-based builds, are very popular. We're in the midst of one right now in Betrayal League. A lot of the time in those sorts of leagues, something with maybe 3 to 4 poor to average rolls, but that has 1 or 2 well rolled out of these 2 combinations, crit multi and crit chance, can be worth something. So even poorly rolled double crit items can be valuable and worth something in terms of your time to trade. The third combination to look out for is tier 1 life or tier 2 life or tier 1 energy shield or tier 2 energy shield is worth something. So there's a couple of reasons for this, and this is because of the way how Path of Exile structures its defensive layers. So players will often use life-based gear or energy shield base gear, and then the entire build is shaped around either a life build or an energy shield build. So because it's the core of your defenses in PoE, every single build is going to run either life or energy shield. So your market and your demand for items that have well top end rolls, tier 1 or tier 2 rolls for life or energy shield, is everyone in the game. Everyone that's playing Path of Exile is looking for top end rolls in life or energy shield. So rare items that have top tier rolls can be very valuable, even if they've got terrible rolls in the other slots, because crafters will often purchase these rares to then craft wondrous items by removing all of those other poor rolls and simply protecting the one good roll of either life or energy shield. The fourth combination is that multiple tier 1 or tier 2 rolls is worth something. It's worth your time to take a look at. This can be on a pair of boots, whether that tier 1 or tier 2 is movement speed, whether it's life, whether it's other defenses like resistances or armor, evasion, energy shield. It could be something like on a ring, where perhaps you hit a tier 1 or tier 2, adds certain types of elemental damage or physical damage to your attacks or to spells. It could be something like an item that would be non-traditionally used as a weapon slot. So it could be a shield that's got a bunch of defenses on it. Chances are, if a build is using a shield, it's already a pretty defensive build. And if it's looking for a rare shield, then having multiple tier 1 or tier 2 rolls on the shield may be something that someone needs. I'll give you one quick example of this. I once ran a Facebreaker Ancestral Warchief champion as my league starter. And rather than using a unique shield that at that point in time, I believe it cost 4.5 exalted for that particular build, I simply said, I'm not going to use that unique shield because I don't have 4 exalted on me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look to fill all of my other requirements for stats. So all of my intelligence, all of my dex, there was already a lot of strength on the build, but I'm going to use all of that extra stuff that I need. Life, intelligence, dex, I'm going to try and find all of that on a shield. And it was a very, very good shield that I was able to find for, I believe, like 10 to 15 chaos. So that was a sale for somebody else of 10 to 15 chaos that was worth their time to ID, that didn't necessarily have the best in slot, stats on a shield, but it did have multiple tier 1 or tier 2 rolls. So the general rule being tier 1 or tier 2 rolls is worth something. And the more rolls that you have on an item that are top tier or close to it, the greater the chance it will be valuable to some build. Just had a guildmate actually sell something for a couple of X that had multiple tier 3 stat rolls on it, and I believe the lowest stat roll on it was a tier 4, but it had multiple tier 3s and then one tier 1. So you never know when you're looking at something that's got multiple top end tier rolls just exactly how valuable it's going to be. So it's worth something. It's worth your time to price check it. So let's take a look at the step-by-step process for looting in PoE with an eye specifically trained on rares. So first off, you want to make sure that you have a loot filter that is up to date, okay? Up-to-date loot filter. If your loot filter, whichever provider it is, or whichever loot filter it is that you're using, whether that's your own or it's based on somebody else's, make sure that it's up-to-date, because a lot of the times as the economy shifts in Path of Exile, different things come out that might be more valuable. One of the great things about playing Path of Exile is that as a community, we often learn things throughout the league, and that shifts the way how the economy, the supply and the demand of different things are traded, and the values at which things are traded. So you want to make sure that your loot filter is up to date. You also want to make sure that your loot filter is only showing things that you want to pick up or at least look at. So in a lot of the featured video gameplay footage that you see above me, I actually still have displayed in this particular clip wisdom scrolls and portal scrolls still showing on my loot filter. And a lot of you are going to wonder, why the heck are you doing that? And that's because for the particular character that I'm running in this video, I do have a portal gem set up, but on another character that I run with the same loot filter, I don't have that portal gem. So I still want to pick up those portal scrolls if I need to pour it out from somewhere. And I still want to have the scrolls of wisdom available, so that way if I see something on the ground that I want to quickly identify and then throw back on the ground, I'd like to be able to do that and have access to those scrolls of wisdom without having to keep a bunch of them in my stash tab. So, secondly, when an unidentified rare pops up on your loot filter, you should know first off right away if you're going to use it for the chaos recipe or not. So the chaos recipe, of course, is trading in a full set of items, so one type of item for every single slot on your character. You can do that whether that's identified or unidentified. The item levels of all of the items, every single one that you're trading to the vendor needs to be between level 65 to level 75. If there is a full set that is unidentified, the vendor will give you back 2 chaos. If the set is identified, or even if just one thing in the set is identified, the vendor will give you back 1 chaos. So if you're farming using the chaos recipe, then you automatically know and have your filter set up as such, so that way you're just picking things up and you're not identifying it. But for us, as we're learning more about the market and we're learning how to price yellows, know right away if you're going to use that yellow that you pick up for the chaos recipe, because if you're not, then you know whether or not you're going to identify it for potential self-use, potential trade, or potential crafting. So once you've decided to identify a rare, maybe that's because you've said, look, I'm not doing the chaos recipe right now, or I've got my loot filter set in such a manner that I only want rares to drop that are worth my time to look at. Once you've decided to identify a rare, you should quickly decide if it's worth keeping for your personal use, for trading, or for crafting. So if you've decided that you're not going to use the rare, and you're not going to craft on it, which my guess is that's where a lot of you are at, that you're not going to craft on it and you're not going to use it as an upgrade for your own character, that's when pricing knowledge actually becomes a factor. So as you're pricing out any of those things that are worth something, you want to cast as wide a net as possible to give yourself the best chance at having other comparable items to look at in your search process, and thereby competitively price your own item. So when you're evaluating a rare for trade, you can use several helpful tools. The first one is the PoE trade macro. using its 3-second quick search. Its default command is Control+D, and the reason why I call it a 3-second search is because it varies on everybody's different machines, but this is typically the quick search function, where you will simply pull up about 10 different listings of other people that are selling supposedly similar things to you. Now, the PoE trade macro, I've got a whole video on it. It's not necessarily that reliable at pricing out specifically rares. So most often what I use that for when it comes to rares is just to tell me, okay, what's the range of the first 10 people selling something that I just picked up? If there's 10 people that are all selling this similar thing for a chromatic orb, then I probably didn't just pick up a really good item that's worth something to me. However, if I use the quick search and it says, hey, there's one person selling for a chromatic, another person selling for an alchemy, another person selling for a chaos, another person selling for 5 chaos, okay, this is now worth something, and I'm going to slow down and take the time to price it out. Secondly, you can use the PoE trade macro for the 10-second or advanced search, which is Control+Alt+D. So if you see something during that quick search that says, hey, this is worth price checking a little bit further, then you can simply jump on to the advanced search by hitting Control+Alt+D, and that will pull up another window wherefrom you can do additional searches and a little bit more expansion of your search to see exactly what sort of prices you're coming up against and exactly what sort of rolls are on that item. Then lastly, you can manually input your rolls into your preferred trade website. The PoE trade macro also has an extension for you to do this where you can simply open it up in a web browser. Oftentimes what I will do now is I will manually trade for what I know to be the most desirable rolls on an item. So if you're remembering back to those 4 different combinations, does this have highly rolled life or resistances? Does this have highly rolled critical chance or critical multi? Does this have multiple tier 1 rolls across the board? Does this have multiple defensive well-rolled mods across the board? You can manually input those into your trade website in order to see exactly where your item compares to the rest of the market. As you're casting that wide net, a couple of things to keep in mind. So when you're searching for other comparable rares, make sure that you have broad enough search terms that will include other similarly rolled gear. So an example of this would be if you have an item that's got, let's say, 80 maximum life. You'll want to put the minimum to several points below your roll to see what other prices will be comparable. So let's say if 80 is a tier 1 roll, you're going to want to drop down to maybe 70 or 65 to see what people at tier 2 or tier 3 are pricing their items at and whether or not that's a factor in the price. It could be that your search is going to return that there's a big difference between tier 1 and tier 2, and so your item at tier 1 is now much more valuable because you put the time in to expand your search and see exactly what those differences are in between tier 1 and tier 2 rolls. So you'll want to cast a wide net by setting your minimum value to a bit lower than what your item's value presently is. Secondly, when searching for other comparable rares, make sure your currency of sale is worth your time. So what do I mean by this? What price point is worth your time to stop farming, stop mapping, stop leveling, to stop whatever it is that you're doing to respond to an incoming trade request and then actually trade? Is the price point going to be a chromatic orb? Is it going to be an alchemy orb? Is it a chaos? Is it an exalted? A lot of the times what I will do is I will actually change the price in entire tabs. I'll simply set the entire price of a tab to one particular buyout price while I'm mapping, because I'm saying that that entire tab is not worth me stopping from my mapping with my group unless the actual trade is an enormously highly valuable trade to me. So ask yourself when you're searching for comparable items, okay, there's a bunch of stuff that's come up, but is this really worth my time? Third, when you're casting a wide net, you want to learn from your sales. Every single sale of item, whether that's you purchasing from another player or another player purchasing from you, is an opportunity to learn more about the Path of Exile market and learn how people evaluate rares. So at the end of the day or week, depending on your frequency of play, some of us play every single day, some of us only get a chance to play every once in a while. You want to reevaluate your sales or your lack of sales. Items that haven't sold should be reduced in price, and then items that have sold should be noted as having demand in the present market. So if there's one buyer out there for one of your items, chances are that there will be others for similar types of items. So let's say you've got something in our example above with 80 life, and let's say you get a couple of pings right away. You can know right away that, hey, whatever it is that I've stumbled upon at the price point that I've put it at is in high demand. So now if I find other items that are similar base type and have similar roles, I can at least know that there is a price point at which there's demand for this item that's worth my time. So to sum up, rares are valuable in PoE due to the wide variety of top-end roles that they can achieve in a flexible item slot. Rares can have massive value differences based on any number of combinations in their item composition. There are 4 solid combinations to commit to memory. There are more. You can leave us some more down in the comments, but these were the 4 that I was able to come up with. Life plus 2 or more resistances, crit multi plus crit chance, tier 1 or 2 life or ES, multiple tier 1 or tier 2 rolls. You want to ensure that your loot filter is up to date and only displaying items you want to interact with. Only take the time to pick up an item if it will be worth your time to sell that item. Have your preferred search tool ready to go while you're playing, either on a second screen, on your phone. All of us have 2 screens. You might not have 2 monitors at your home or at your setup, but almost all of us have got 2 screens between our PC setup as well as our phone, and most of the trade websites can function through your phone. So make sure that you've got your preferred search tools ready to go when you're playing, whether that is a second screen, whether that's on your phone or a second monitor, or via a third-party tool like the PoE Trade Macro. You want to use a wider range of roles than your own items in order to ensure that your item will compete in price with similar market-priced items. Then you want to learn from your sales and from your stock. Items in your stash are doing nothing for you presently except sitting there, and every click that you make to identify something and put it in your stash is one less moment of gaining XP or looting something that's even more valuable. Okay, so several FAQs that we've had come up. So, hey Iron, thanks for the video. Can you price check this item for me? No. If I price check the item, then I benefit from learning about the item and the market. But if you're willing to put the time in to your own price check, then you'll actually grow in knowledge. And that means that in the future, you'll be able to price check your own rares at a better rate than I ever would possibly be able to do so. So no, I'm not going to price check your item for you. You will learn to do it, and you're going to get better at it as you go. Second question. Hey Iron, thanks for the video. My search isn't showing any other rares with similar roles. Did I just get a really valuable item? This happens every single day in our guild and every single day on the Discord. It's just the reality of sometimes our search tools are a little bit tighter than what we would hope for. And so the reality of that means that maybe price check it with expanding your roles on both the minimum and the maximum. Then you want to remove prefixes and suffixes one at a time until other similar items start to show up in your search. When in doubt, you want to cast a wider net, because chances are will be other people selling similar rare items. It could still be that it's a very, very valuable item, but chances are somebody else also has something similar, and so that at least gives you a price point of comparison. Last question. Hey Iron, thanks for the video. What is the most expensive item you've ever identified? I've gotten pretty lucky with some rare rings that have hit life plus resists, and those go for quite a bit, especially if they're unset rings that can roll multiple levels to the socketed gem. Those are great. Those often go for quite a bit, and so maybe those aren't the actual like top stuff that I've ever gotten, but I know that that is just a reliable source of income for me pretty much every single league. So thank you so much for watching. Feel free to leave us a comment down below with some of your own tips or your own ideas for pricing out rares. What questions do you have when it comes to pricing rares, maybe that we didn't get to in this video? And then what's the most expensive rare you've ever identified? And then lastly, do you farm using the chaos recipe? I still farm with the chaos recipe a lot of the time. I was actually doing that in the video footage above. How about you? Do you farm with the chaos recipe? When do you find that to be most helpful and beneficial to you? When do you stop doing it? At what point in the league? Or if you've never done the chaos recipe, let us know if you start doing the chaos recipe and how it works out for you. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope today is the day a Mirror of Calandra drops for you.